Hello, and welcome to this Sonnen Academy accreditation training video. Commissioning process, as well as a good look at the user portal. First things, we'll have a look at the commissioning process. This is a vital step of setting up the Sonnen system, correct country codes, user, installation details and everything else. So within the user manual that comes with the system, you'll get instructions and the URL to be able to find the commissioning assistant. So you need to connect a laptop or PC locally to the Sonnen system through the customer's internet connection, through the switch or direct to the router. You can't do this externally. So in those instructions you'll find the URL to type into the browser to be able to get up the access to the commissioning assistant. Here you need to select the installer and type in the password. Then you find the dashboard, which is a direct link to the Sonnen system, and select on the left hand menu the commissioning assistant itself. Now the first step of the commissioning is to offer you the option to do a firmware update. I suggest you just press continue and not do this because sometimes the firmware update can take some time. The Sonnen system will automatically do a firmware update within the first 24 hours or so, so you don't need to worry that the firmware isn't necessarily up to date at time of commissioning. You can do this, well, the system will do it automatically on its own later on. So just go through the intuitive steps, filling out the owner details, installation details, the installer details and everything else that you find on the first section of the assistant. Also important, set the correct time zone and then press continue. Now here you get the choice of selecting who gets notified and when. So this is primarily to do with an outage of the system. So for any reason the Sonnen system stops communicating with our servers on the back end, it'll send an email to either the installer or to the system owner to notify them that the system is not currently communicating. It doesn't necessarily know that the system's not working correctly, it's purely telling them it's no longer communicating. The next tab then gives you the option to set the correct country code. This process is obviously important to set up the system correctly. Now with some regional locations, networks have specific requirements for inverter response modes. What you need to do here is visit the Sonnen support website to download the appropriate tech note for the network that the system is being installed in. You can then go through the process of creating the exact settings of the system based on the information contained within the tech note. What I suggest is that if you can, open both screens simultaneously to then be able to follow the correct settings. Now some of the setting terminology isn't as per the network's requirements. For instance, the ST1 values, these are all to do with the reactive voltage curve, so this is volt var. We then got this SPI settings. These are the sustained voltage thresholds, which you'll find in AS4777.2, and you've also at the end there got all the volt watt parameters. So these three requirements, volt watt, volt var and sustained power thresholds or sustained voltage thresholds, these are the three most commonly requested settings as per the networks. Given that each of the networks in Australia, or generally most of the networks in Australia, have their own unique requirement for these settings, we can't have these automatic in the system. You have to set these appropriately. Next section is to look at the PV. So if it's a hybrid system, it'll have a PV input and you can check the value here. Even if it's an AC coupled system, you have the option here to be able to set the PV system size, really just be able to reference the portal. Now there are some settings there which, to be honest, just ignore, which is to do with controlling PV output. These are really settings for other regions. The power meter options, there are three different ways fundamentally that you can set up the system: consumption method, grid method and differential method. These are all explained. There's a specific training video which covers those in more detail. The power meter itself you can go into on the next screen, which is a very useful tool to help you be able to just double check that the meter has been set up and is measuring the correct loads or the correct power flow. You have some additional operating modes: self-consumption or timer use. Now the timer use mode is a very frequently used function, and what this gives you is the option to be able to set start and end times for direct charging from the grid, and you can also then set the amount of power that you want to receive, or you want the system to be able to charge with. You can actually set up numerous profiles because sometimes you might want to have multiple options for the customer. If need be, these settings can be adjusted at a later date. So if you don't know specifically what the customer want in terms of time of use, they can be adjusted later on once the customer's got a much better idea of how the system operates. Now, a common one also is to set the protect, so the backup system. The most important part of that is to set a minimum state of charge. So this is a reserve capacity that the backup will be able to be utilized if the grid goes down. The system will then go through a test function just to double check that what it is seeing is consistent with what has been installed. Number of battery modules, measurement for the production, as well as the measurement for the consumption. That's basically it. You then got the completion section where you can just confirm that everything's been set correctly, and then the system will then set all the values and upload that information to our servers so that we also get verification that the system has been installed and commissioned correctly. And then you'd simply start the Sonnen battery, which then takes you straight back to the dashboard. Now the dashboard itself has a whole series of other information within the system menu. You can look at the system settings. So here you can actually double check how the system's been set up, and you can double check the information that you've inputted into the system through the commissioning process. If you wanted to change any of the values, for instance the backup buffer on the protect on the backup system, or you wanted to change the time of use functions, you can do that here as well. You can also set up the DRM function as well if you're using the Sonnen system to divert excess energy to do something like heat hot water. You can double check all the battery statistics and the battery settings. Most of these are unable for you to actually adjust, but it's a very good reference for you to be able to check and it's been configured correctly. Again, inverter properties, a huge amount of information here. Sometimes we call upon this to help analyze the system to ensure it's working correctly. Mostly this information is reserved for the use of the service department, which we can access remotely. But for some installers, it can be useful to be able to access some of this information just to see how the system is working, especially to see how it's responding to certain parameters such as temperature. But just like the battery values, none of these settings are able or eligible for an installer to be able to adjust. They're purely view only. Additionally, with the inverter, you can double check all of the response modes. Sometimes it's useful to take a screenshot of these values because some electrical inspectors need verification that the system has been set up as per the specific requirements of the network. Next values are for the power meter. Very useful and important functions, really to be able to make sure that not only have you had the CTs set in the right position and the right way around, but also that the power flows are all being captured that are intended, especially with something like production, if multiple PV systems are connected. You also have the ability here to be able to change some of the values if the metering has got the inputs in the wrong way around, or potentially the CTs the wrong way around. The digital controls, the I/O values, these are really again reference only. You do have the option to be able to set relay controls for things like I said before, like hot water. Software installer, if you did want to leave the system doing an update after you've commissioned it, you can trigger a software update at this point of the post-commissioning process. And here we have the screen which gives you the overall status of how the system is operating. If there are any alarms or triggers here which need looking at, it will basically show you, and you can contact the service department and they can talk you through what any of these potential errors may mean. But as you can see here, everything's working correctly. There are no known issues. And there we have it, back to the overall dashboard, which just shows you basic information of how the system's operating and where the power is going to and is coming from. And once complete, just close it down. Now next, let's have a quick look at the user portal. So the user portal is the main interface for the customer. Within the system bill of materials, the customer will get a welcome letter. On the welcome letter is the system username, which is the serial number, as well as the password for them to be able to log in to the user portal itself. So the address is also on the letter that they need to punch in, and they can set up their username and password and then register to be able to access. Now this data is actually coming from the servers, so the Sonus system transmit recorded data to our servers. We then take out the relevant data and use this to transmit to the web portal. So as you'll see, the actual dashboard is different to the dashboard using the commissioning assistant. The commissioning assistant is looking at the data directly connected to the system. So as you see, the user portal gives a good overview, gives you a status, it gives you the history where you can select day, week, month, year to be able to look at exactly how the system has been operating. If you need to, you can actually select a specific range by highlighting it, and the system will and the portal will automatically zoom in to that particular region. Mousing over it will also give you all the particular values for those time periods. Down the bottom here we have the self-consumption and production graphs, the pie charts. The most important one is the autonomy value. The autonomy value is the relationship between how much PV has been produced and how much went to these specific loads. The graph gives you the ability to be able to zoom in or isolate specific values, discharge, charge, PV production, and everything else. There is also a very useful tool, which is the forecast option. So based on the profile of the system, it will give you an idea of the expected and anticipated amount of PV production for the coming days based on what has happened previously. There's also the option for downloads. The download gives you the ability to be able to download all of the data of the system in CSV format for certain time periods. There's also an option there to be able to download a whole series of the documents associated with the systems. These are also available on the support website. And again, back to the overview page. Once done, simply log out.